Good morning, and welcome to a special Christmas edition of Diving with Captain Sean. Today I've got my explorer's outfit on, pith helmet, special explorer shirt, because today we're going to be exploring the wilds of the South Pacific. Now, the South Pacific is pretty vast, so we're going to be breaking it down in segments. And the first segment that we're going to explore is Vanuatu. Now, where is Vanuatu, you might ask? We're going to get to that. Now, Vanuatu, it's an island chain with 83 different islands, but we're only going to focus on about 10 of those because to do a complete series on Vanuatu would take hours and hours and hours. But again, where's Vanuatu exactly? Well, we're going to show you. So Vanuatu is approximately 1,100 miles north of New Zealand and 500 miles west of Fiji. Like I said, the archipelago is comprised of 83 different islands. And on those islands are many, many different dialects. It was settled by both the French and the English. The local language that's spoken there is called Bislama, which is kind of a pidgin English and was actually taught by U.S. soldiers when they were in Vanuatu in the South Pacific during World War II. Our special featured boat today is going to be Latitude. Latitude was a vessel that I was captain of in Vanuatu and throughout the South Pacific. It's currently in Thailand and Singapore right now. Was a great platform to visit the South Pacific. Two of the books that really gave me a desire to go see the South Pacific were these two: Getting Stoned with Savages by Martin Troost, and it's his time in Vanuatu drinking kava, and it's a funny book if you ever get a chance to read it. But the one that really sparked my interest was, of course, Tales of the South Pacific by James Michener. They did, the movie and the musical South Pacific came from that. It's still a wonderful book. It's still timely, and you can still find some of the places that Michener described beautifully in that. And oddly enough, I read that book while I was in Thailand and said that I would really want that to be my next stop. And it was a few years later. Also, to the Southeast Asia Sea Pilot, produced by our friend Bill O'Leary. And Grenville Fordham and Andy Dowden. The Billow, of course, you remember from the series that we did on Thailand. I actually wrote the section on Vanuatu. It's a small section. We're going to be releasing a new edition that's probably coming out in 2024, which will have an expanded edition on Vanuatu and other places within the South Pacific. One of the other boats that how I originally went there on was a boat called Blue Gold. It was a 52-meter Benetti Staysail schooner, and that boat to this day owes me nothing. I've never pushed a boat harder, and never had a boat that never ever quit on me. Wonderful, wonderful vessel. She was the great granddaddy of all Perinis. But anyway, we're going to start right in. And normally I have a special guest with some expertise in this area. I called all my friends that had been with me in Vanuatu and knew Vanuatu. Unfortunately, most of them had Christmas obligations or couldn't be here today. But I have an amazing special guest. He's Worth Avenue's own Will Baldwin. He's a sailor. He's never been to Vanuatu, so we're going to explore this together. And let's welcome onto the stage Will. Good morning,
Sean.
Will.
How you doing? Thanks for having me on.
You are welcome. So thanks for joining us for this voyage to the South Pacific. Now, the very first island that we're going to talk about is would be the first island that you would encounter if you are coming up from New Zealand, or the last island that you would encounter if you were coming down, sailing towards New Zealand. Again, think of the Vanuatu's in it's pretty straight island chain from north to south. And this would be the last jumping off point, where it would be 1,100 miles from there. Now,
Sean, where would you fly into for this?
Well, you wouldn't fly into Anatum, I'll tell you that. You'd fly into Port Vila, that's the capital. We're going to be talking about that island a little bit. In the itinerary, which is the companion to this, I like normally if you've been to some other dive-ins, where I've done Norway and Thailand and the Bahamas and such. In the extras section, I put in airports, private jet fields, restaurants, stuff to do. And that will be in the itinerary. If anybody wants that, they can email me.
That'll be part of the show notes, I guess.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, you can just go if you've signed up via email, you'll get a link to get that particular itinerary. Now, the picture there is actually a picture of my crew as we were sailing back to New Zealand, and they're in a giant pot right there. And now the Vanuatu, oddly enough, the last reported incident of cannibalism, was in 1994. And to me that was amazing. It's like the island was rife with cannibals. And the cannibals in the book in the book Getting Stoned with Cannibals by Martin Joost, he actually tried to track down a person that had eaten human flesh, and he eventually wound up dead. And what they said was that they basically just didn't have enough meat. But today, with modern conveniences like supermarkets and such on the islands, and better access to meat, the cannibals don't have to be cannibals anymore. They're the islanders in one of the islands. It's funny, they would actually, there's still hill tribes that have very little contact with the outside world. And when they do, is they often come in town, and they'll eat things like, pizza and junk food for the very first time, and then go back up into the hills where they're, probably still eating each other. But anyway, back to what we're talking about in Vanuatu, and specifically in Anatum. Anatum was one of the cannibal islands, which is why they have that big pot there. If you're a sailor, there's a fantastic range that the cruise ships have put in there. It's huge. You can see it coming in. It's a nice clear path, and there's really good anchorages there. There's a couple of great dives and snorkels, and they have a little island that they bring all the guests off the cruise ship that they go in there.
But Sean, so what time of year are we talking about where it's not typhoon season or so? When's the optimal time to go?
I've been there multiple times a year. Probably the best time to go would be basically if you're up on in the northern hemisphere. Our winter is their summer. That's a good time to go. But I've been there both winter and summer.
And as far as sailing though, there's not a lot of wind though, right? Or am I wrong about that?
It's steady. It's like almost like you get similar trades to the Caribbean, a little less. Oddly enough, the couple times that I needed there to be wind when I was sailing Blue Gold, it was either blowing the wrong direction or not blowing enough. Now, the next island that we're going to visit in the island chain is Tanna. In South Pacific, of course, everyone's heard of all the volcanoes that they have there. The Tanna is like I think a must stop. Not great anchorages around. I've anchored on both sides of the island. Really swelly. If you anchor on the eastern side, you get this big swell that comes from the direction of Fiji, and you'll be rocking and rolling. And if you don't have 0-speed stabilizers on board the boat, it's not a pleasant anchorage. The other anchorage on the other side of the island is real sketchy as well, and you get a much tighter chop. But again, well worth it. And Tanna, what I would recommend is that you were in Port Vila or on Afate, the main island, they have flights that fly to Tanna. This right here, this is a video. This is a video of the inside of a volcano. This is from a good distance away, and you can hear, if you listen carefully, you can hear that lava going back and forth. this right here, that's actually a picture that I took from actually, I was as a way too close a vantage point. You can see that's where I took that picture from.
Sean, do you have to get special permits or insurance for any of this?
At the time when I was there, it was wide open. We didn't get any permits. There's a guide. We took a guide up to when I was there the first time to Tana. We took a guide up there to the top of the volcano, and I don't know where he went, but after I ran back up the hill, he said, "Oh, you weren't supposed to go down there." And I said, "Well, you tell me now, after I almost got blown up by the volcano." But amazing, amazing. You'll never get that close to a volcano. We were on there when it was just erupting enough that it was exciting, and we got some really amazing. We get some great pictures. The second time I went there, which was on, actually, we didn't stop there when we were on latitude. We went by it at night, and it was erupting pretty good. And we were about like 10 miles off the island. And you also want to be careful is that you don't want to get too close to a volcano being erupted up for obvious reasons, but the ash is not fluffy and nice. It's actually super abrasive. So if you get a boat with a really nice yacht style paint job or nice decks, you don't want to get that ash on the boat. Now, the next island that we're visiting to is actually from Tana, the next island up. It's in between Tana and the main island of Afate. And there's a typo here. It should say Dillon Bay on Aramongo. Now, I mentioned earlier that Vanuatu was settled by both the English and the French, and there was probably some Portuguese in there at one point. But Aramongo was primarily settled by the French, and there's a mission still there to this day, which is run by French nuns. This is what happens when you Google French nuns, is that this is the picture that you get, but not these French nuns. I didn't see any wine drinking nuns on Aramongo. I saw more like these nuns, taking care of the natives. Will, you're not commenting on anything. I need some feedback, some give and take right here.
I'm trying to understand what I'm seeing, Sean.
I'm giving you history, pearls of wisdom.
Yeah, I can
about
see
how
that.
The French were there to save souls.
Yeah,
there you go.
That wasn't in the slideshow that I saw earlier, Sean.
Now you gotta have some surprise.
Thank you.
Anyway, we were there. Aramongo is known for the tools that they had in these islands are really rudimentary, and you can tell as you go through the South Pacific what the islanders that had access to metal and metal tools. Vanuatu, not so much. Like how they would carve things and make things were what they would find lying around. Aramongo is known for some of its basket weaving. This is a basket that I actually did buy on Aramongo. It's fairly intricate for the islands there, but some really some neat stuff. Now they didn't really have a Fendi or a Gucci on that island, but anyway, from Dillon Bay, the next stop is Port Vila in Afate. This is the capital island. If you were flying into Vanuatu, this is where you would go. This is where you would go. The airport's fairly rudimentary. I think they've got one or two airfields there. There's a local airline called Air Vanuatu that flies to New Zealand. South Pacific Air, I think, flies from Fiji. The other flights that you can get to Vanuatu is to say you're coming from the U.S., you'd fly from L.A. or San Francisco to New Zealand, then New Zealand up to Port Vila in Vanuatu. Then from there, you could fly to the other islands, which is like there's a little flight that takes you to Tana, where the volcano is, and then another one that would take you to Espiritu Santo. And I think there's a few other little islands they fly to. The other options that you can get there are seaplane or there's a helicopter service there as well too, and I've used both. The seaplane is really good if you've got guests that you want to take off on outer islands and bring them flying. So if you got guests that need to get off, you can use that service and they'll come pick you up and then bring them back into Vanuatu. Now, what you're looking at right now is
here, Sean.
Is what?
Is the shopping district?
This is yes, that's the shopping district here in Vanuatu. This is downtown Vanuatu at rush hour. And there was a government subsidy that like you could get a loan to they needed transportation. So they gave subsidies out that everyone could buy these little Toyota buses. So you'd never have to worry about getting to point A to point B because these buses are everywhere, all over the island. The lot of different cultures, like the Chinese, are pretty ingrained on this island. They I mean, we can talk. One of the things I've talked about is overfishing, especially in the South Pacific. And you get the Chinese have given a lot to the islands, as well as the Japanese have to gain fishing rights. They kind of got railroaded a little bit in the beginning. A lot of that's changed. The natives have the locals, or the Nevans as they're called, are more switched on to saving their environment. One of the things that I've talked about, there's a little reef just north of Afate that I dove back in 2008, and it was this cool little reef. It was a great dive, all little fishes and everything. And then I dove it again in 2016 when I was there on Latitude, and it had been completely wiped out. It looked like the surface of the moon, and that was because and again, I'm not pointing fingers at the Chinese, but because they went in there and we're trying to harvest the little baby fish that were swimming on these reefs. And how they would do that is they'd go down there and they'd open up a bottle of bleach, literally, like on the reef. The fish would swim into the bleach. It would stun them, and then they could scoop them right up. And of course, they strip mine of all the fish are gone now, and then that bleach settles down and completely kills the reef.
Oh God.
Yeah, so they've actually gotten better at that. There's better environmental regulations that have come out of kind of that devastation. The locals have been seeing that, and it's really affected the local population because you get guys that have been fishing in these lands for literally 1,000 years, and I'll tell you, the fishing in Vanuatu is fantastic, and they were going to grounds that were plentiful, and all of a sudden they weren't seeing any fish, or they were seeing dead reefs, and luckily the Australian and New Zealand governments actually were able to help the Nevans to say no to Chinese money or Japanese money or building massive fish processing plants. So that's a whole nother thing. Now, the woman that you see in this, life is harsh in the islands. She's about 35 years old. No, that is the life expectancy in Vanuatu is actually quite long. They have some of the lowest incidence of cancer and heart disease of anywhere in the world. Probably a lot because of the diet that they have, and also to the lifestyle. It's very stress. It's not a lot of stress. She's one of the merchants, or she could be shopping in the flower market there. That's in the center of Port Vila. Now, if you'll notice the dress that she's wearing, that's a throwback from the missionaries that came to these islands back in the 1800s. The natives, for the most part, just didn't wear any clothes. And that wasn't good for the missionaries. So they gave them these dress designs. And it's a design that's been carried forward for, hundreds of years. And they tend to favor the floral patterns.
Yeah, she looks like she's part of central casting there, Sean.
Yeah, yeah, no, really. Yeah. They're The Nevans are probably some of the nicest people that I've ever met. There's no natural predators on the islands of Vanuatu. Now, this sign that you says like children and cattle, you don't think of like good beef coming from Vanuatu, but it's probably some of the best beef I've ever eaten. They're fed, they come from Espiritu Santo where they're allowed to graze, and they eat a lot of mangoes. So and fruit, it's what they're kind of fed on, or so you'll get kind of like a mango flavored beef, like the steak when you eat it, and they're just delicious.
And what about the children, Sean?
The children, well, they you got to be careful because the children are usually playing with the cattle there, so you got to make sure that you're driving at a reasonable pace so you don't hit a cow or
you just got to lead them a little bit.
You just got to lead them a little. Anyway, you lost my train of thought. So, but the South Pacific, on the island, the actual South, there are no natural predators out in the woods. You could go in the woods, not encounter snakes or crazy jaguars or anything. Even the bugs are fairly benign. There's one really poisonous bug they have the Vanuatu centipede, and that has been described as like if Darth Vader was an insect, it would be the Vanuatu centipede. They're super aggressive, and they will give you a nasty sting. That's about it. But in the water surrounding Vanuatu and a lot of the South Pacific, you have a lot of sharks. There are places in Vanuatu where you do not go into the water, mostly volcanic beaches where the tigers will generally hunt. For the most part, I mean, if you've ever been in the water, and people tell me this, they're like, are there sharks here? And I say, well, if you've ever been in the water, you've been in the water with sharks. There's a story about the beef cows going from Santo to Afate, and they drop them where they go as they push this barge into this black sand beach. And they just literally drive the barge right up to the beach, put a little gangway out, and the cows go onto a field on Afate. Well, anyway, the barge was coming over one night, and it was relatively rough with a following sea. Well, the barge nosedived. They were about 100 feet off the beach, and all the cows went into the water, and not a single one made it to the beach. They all got eaten by the sharks that were following the barge all the way from Santo, looking for scraps. So the sharks are definitely there, but. Anyway, welcome to Vanuatu. The other thing that Vanuatu, where a lot of people just didn't even know it existed until World War II. And that's, of course, when James Michener wrote about his experiences in the South Pacific and in Vanuatu. And what you're looking at there, what did you identify that plane as, Will?
That looks like a Corsair to me.
Yeah, you'd be correct, and they still find this is a wreck of one, and like occasionally, like up in the canopies in the jungles, they fairly recently found a Japanese Zero that was tucked up into one of the trees. There's Japanese ships, subs, planes all over the island. There's a cool that's near a little, they call it a military museum, and it's basically all the Coke bottles from all the different countries that the soldiers would drink while they were anchored at a ship called Havana Bay. Anyway, they had a grass called a creeper grass. It's really wild. Is when you step on it, it actually closes and you can see footprints. And they planted that creeper grass around bases in the South Pacific so that they could, if the guys were on patrol, they could walk by the grass and see if anybody had walked on it. So kind of neat. But World War II, the soldiers brought a lot to Vanuatu. They didn't, up until World War II, they didn't have any structures. The weather is beautiful. They would generally live in caves or underneath the canopies. They didn't even have huts. So the soldiers taught them how to build huts. They gave them bislamen. And then now you have all the modern conveniences. That right there, that was a sign. We literally were hiking through the jungle and we saw that sign, just top up here, Digicel. And there was a stick next to the tree. So I said, what the heck? So I hit the tree with a stick, and then out comes like literally like a native wearing a loincloth, and he's got a little pouch, and he sold me $5 to top up my phone. And cellular networks throughout Vanuatu have really opened the country up to banking, to education, especially to just being able to connect with different natives on the other island, and giving really natives the Nevans kind of like they can see what's happening in the outside world. I used to joke and say that if there was like the rest of the world disappeared and the power went off in Vanuatu, they would just slowly fade back into the jungle, and that's exactly what would
Sean,
happen.
do you know if there's a Starlink footprint there currently? Or?
Oh, well, that's I haven't been back there since they have had Starlink, and that's been a game changer everywhere. From the, I mean, even like we've got trips planned on Asteria up in the Arctic this summer. And when I was first there, we had Iridium. That was it. And we would have to go back into Longyearbyen to hook up to the Wi-Fi. But now with Starlink, which has a clear footprint over Svalbard, huge game changer. Wow. As for connectivity, but and not just to check your Facebook thing, but for weather, for all sorts of different reports. It's really allows you.
Iridium is expensive and slow.
Oh, extremely expensive and slow. I mean, there were bigger plans that you had, like the cruise ships and stuff would use, or the military. But yeah, it was the Iridium. When I would check my weather up there, I'd use a sat phone, and I had to do that quite frequently in Vanuatu as well too. Is like I would check via sat phone, but the cell network when I first got there, Digicel launched the cell network all through the islands. And again, that was a game changer. You pick up signal here and there and get a weather report and then be able to go on. Now, one of the things also Vanuatu is known for is kava. And kava is like, if you have like a martini, you're like, wow, that was really good. You want another martini perhaps, or like, another 10. The kava, the last thing you want after a shell of kava is another shell of kava. But it's how business is done in the South Pacific to some extent. This was on the back deck of Blue Gold. This is on an island called Mewu, which we'll talk about in a minute. And they were making this kava, and they would grind this root on that board using a piece of coral, and then filter it through like a coconut mesh. And then you'd get this and then serve it like in a coconut shell, and then you drink it, and it had a numbing effect on you. And it was kind of like if you drank a beer and then did a whippet. Yeah, that was the extent of it. But that was really the only libation they really had out in the islands. That's a picture of me, actually, the very first time I tried kava. That was the look. That's basically like, that's kava face there. And you can see Ties, who was on board Blue Gold with me, had the same look.
He looks like he's about to hurl.
Yeah, no, that's hurling is definitely part of kava. It's like,
okay.
It's awful. I don't care if I ever have another shell of kava again.
Tastes better coming up.
Oh no, oh God, no. Kava's pretty bad.
Well, speaking of spewing.
Yeah, speaking of spewing, perfect segue. So as we leave Afate, we go on to our next island, which is Epi. Now that's a view from the backside of Epi looking east, and there's an island there with a volcano, and that picture was taken around the time that we were there on latitude. And I tried to get close to that volcano just to get some so we could get some good drone shots of it. But the seas around it were really rough. A lot of times you get these islands, they're circular, so you wind up getting seas. It's just crappy all the way
And
all
then
the
a
way
lot of them have
around.
like these barrier reefs, right? I mean, what's the depth in and around those islands, Sean?
Very deep. You get, I mean, they're volcanically formed, so they come right up from the bottom, and so it gets really deep.
But
Sometimes, but then again, you'll get the odd reef.
but are they well charted?
No, one of the books that I originally used was this book right here, and like oftentimes, like I still have some original notes, and oftentimes, like that was the best chart that we had.
I mean, and there's a lot of a shit ton of wrecks over there, aren't there?
Yo, yeah, no, there are. When we'll talk about, yeah, I'm going to show you some of the wrecks that we have. There's an area on a Espiritu Santo which has tons of wrecks now. But one of the cool things about Epi, and I love it, if you're there in October, that's when they harvest the mangoes. Now, there was a coconut plantation that was started in the 1800s, and this woman ran this coconut plantation. And part of the thing that she loved mangoes. So coconut traders from all over the South Pacific brought her mango trees, and she grew this grove of mango trees. And there's probably, I think, well over 20 different varieties of mangoes. I didn't know there were 20 different varieties of mangoes in the South Pacific or in general. But anyway, this grove has all these different mango trees, and every single tree tastes like a different mango. And you have one mango that's really spicy, then one other mangoes that are super sweet. And then here we are. This is just some of the crew of Latitude and the natives, and they've got more mangoes they know what to do with. And when one time when we were there on Blue Gold, we literally came back with like buckets full of mangoes, and they were all from different trees. And I remember every morning I'd try like a different mango. It was really great. It's just one of the, again, the only thing you could only find this if you're going there by boat, and if you do have, and you need someone with some local knowledge. It was just a really neat
And then
experience.
how do you find the guide, Sean?
You're looking at them. It was well. I talked to, like, when I first went to Vanuatu in 2008. I went to that World War II museum, and there was a guy there that actually helped the U.S. Navy. And I put a chart down, like literally on the floor of his hut, and we went through like all these different anchorages, and he showed me some like cool stuff. And then I talked to different natives there about where they would go. There was also too an engineer friend of mine that wound up becoming the engineer on Blue Gold, Sam Bell. He'd been there for a while. He had great insight into the islands. Another guy named Justin who lived there. It is again just talking. It was just talking local knowledge. There was there was a cafe called the Number One Cafe in Ifate, and sailors would come in there, and we would talk about where's a good anchorage or where's this, and it was all local knowledge at the first, when I was first over there. The charts have gotten better. Transits makes pretty good charts. Time Zero also makes really good charts they're better than they were than they have been. It's definitely a place in the world where you've got to be extremely prudent going into areas. Also, Sam, the U.S. Navy probably had the best charts, and Sam at the time had gone to the Library of Congress and looked at the Navy charts from World War II and created a notebook with a lot of those, and those were invaluable. We did a project for the National Bank of Vanuatu on Blue Gold, where we actually built banks on all these really, really remote islands. And we would go there, and it was essentially a satellite dish and a PC that was in a box, and little natives could go there and deposit literally like a couple dollars at a time, but they would have bank accounts so they could build credit. And it was a really cool project because we got
capitals across the globe, Sean. That's a
but it was a really, really good, it was a cool project because I got to go to places that you normally would never go. There was this one island we went to called Sola, and it was real tough to get closer up to the Banks Island. We'll talk about one of my favorite islands up in the Banks Island called Uraparapara. Let's be our last stop. But anyway, we went in there, and that was sketchy. There was like, we're starting to get into areas with saltwater crocodiles and bull sharks. And I remember just offloading bags of cement in this black water. And we'd be like, like, okay, do we have eyes on all the crocodiles? And the natives were like, well, there's 6 crocodiles. We're like, are you sure there are just 6 crocodiles? And they're like, yes. And we're like, okay. And then when we'd only see 4, we'd be like, okay, we're not going to get in the water, because you'd literally get in this water. It was so murky that you couldn't see below your waist as you're trying to offload stuff to the beach. That was an adventure. The next island over from Epi, and it's hard to kind of gain perspective without actually going through and looking at a map. Again, if you have the itinerary, which you can, again, email us at Worth Avenue, we'll be happy to send it to you. But over from Epi, you can see the little maplet on the bottom. We cruise over there, and this is an area called the Masculine Islands, which is just to the southeast of a big island called Malakula. Malakula actually means bad ass. So, give you kind of, take that as you want. But anyway, the Masculine Islands are really cool because there was a little like military base there during World War II. So, and off this beach, there's a tank, which is a great little dive. And so you can go dive on. The last time I dove on the tank, there's not much left of it, but there's a lot of fish in there, and you can see this tank underwater. And then hard to see on this particular picture, but every night at sunset, you'd get like 50 dolphins would rip through this inlet. Chasing bait fish when the tide would change, and it was just magical. I remember the first time that happened. It was like we came up, and it was like just dolphins everywhere. So it is a really, really special island. Now, the other thing that's interesting about Vanuatu, you got to negotiate to use the beaches, and each beach is owned by a tribe, and that tribe has a chief, and you literally have to go to the island, find the chief, and negotiate a day at the beach. Well, in the Masculine Islands, there's like 4 different chiefs. Now, there's Chief John, who was educated by the French, and his handwriting's perfect. And then there was Chief Jerry, and Chief Jerry was like, he would come out there immediately for the boat, and he'd be like, I am Chief Jerry, you must pay me for the beach. And he was like literally like in rags. And I'd be like, well, how much for the beach? And he'd be like, I want $10,000. That's where they'd start the negotiations. And I'd say, all right, how about $4 and a mango? And you'd kind of go somewhere in between. But then out would come Chief John's emissary, and he had like a shirt and like a bow tie on, and would give you a letter with perfect handwriting. And it would say, this is Chief John. Chief Jerry is a liar. Do not talk to him. He does not own the beach. He's like, and then he'd be like, Chief, and then Chief Jerry would be like, Chief John is the liar, not me. And then there'd be this negotiation back and forth. But it was just typical island politics. It was like something, that you like kind of combination between like a Star Trek episode and like being back in the 1800s. But really, really little special island group there. The next island up is an island called Ambrum, and there's a bunch of different volcanoes that are in Vanuatu. There's like the ones that are erupting all the time, and then there are literally like giant ones with just giant lakes of lava. What's cool about Ambrum is that when you go by it at night, is just this giant orange glow. Now, even amongst the natives, this island has like a dark magical appeal. They call that taboo, and it's like just just in their sculptures, in everything. It's just got like kind of a dark feel to it, like not black magic, nothing evil, but there's definitely like that the forces of nature there. They're always living like giant next to a giant lake of molten lava. This is actually a kind of a staff or a spear that I got from Ambrum. This was made on that particular island, and you can see it's relatively like rudimentary made. That was carved with shells and rocks. The other islands that got metal, like the Solomons, and we'll do the next series. The next section will be on the Solomon Islands. I'll show you some stuff that they were able to make there because they actually had metal tools, and their wood carving is much more intricate. One of the things that I did get on Malakula, which is where we went and built the banks, was this. Actually, this is a legit cannibal club. It's made out of Lingdom Vitae, and that was I actually hiked up into the mountains and traded that for that particular club. But just really really fascinating cultures. Every island was like, it had its own cultures and traditions. And that was like a picture of, actually, that's a picture I took on Mewu, but you kind of get an idea of like the shamanistic characters of the natives that they're on the islands. The freakiest thing is the Nevans are some of the quietest people that I've ever met. Like, they could be in the same room with you and you wouldn't know it. They can be almost invisible and then fade right back into the jungle. Some of you may know from the you've probably seen this before, like on Discovery Channel or something. It's like the land divers of Vanuatu. It's like where bungee jumping was first started. This is on the cover. I'm a member of the New York Explorers Club. This is on the cover of the Explorers Journal. This is one of the land divers jumping off. This is something amazing to see. They essentially build these big towers and then haul them up using vines. And then part of the rite of passage is kind of hard to see on the screen, but there's a little kid on that, and then there he is jumping off that tower with the vines attached to his feet. Now, they don't wear a whole lot in Vanuatu's. They actually just wear their leaves over their private parts there, and I'm not making this up. You have big Nambas and small Nambas, and that
looks like it takes some pretty big Nambas to do that.
That's just some big Nambas on there. There's a guy up there. This guy is probably the biggest. He's got the biggest Namba of the tribe. They had to get an extra big leaf for him. And he's going to jump from the top of the tower. What's interesting is, like, now Pentecost, you could practically throw a rock at this island from Mewu. They lack fresh water on that island. And you talk to some of they were notorious cannibals and warriors back in the day, opposed to the island of Mewu. And Mewu, bar none, one of my favorite places, not only in Vanuatu, but anywhere on the planet, specifically the island, the village of Ansanvari. The picture there, this is Nixon. He's a dear friend of mine. He was on board Blue Gold with me. He was on board Latitude. He's over there. He was the son of the Chief Nelson, and Chief Nelson was unique. He actually built in his village, built a thing which he called his yacht club. And Nelson saw the value of education, and out of this little village produced literally like doctors, lawyers, diplomats. They went on to go to the University of South Pacific, and then went on to do a lot of really interesting things. And Nixon was the youngest son of Chief Nelson, and I got to meet Chief Nelson back in like when I was in Vanuatu in the early days, and he's since passed away. Interestingly enough, I met Chief Nelson's mother. Now, Nelson was probably in his 70s, 80s when I met him, and I met his mother, who had to be well over 100. And then I'm thinking to myself, have you ever eaten human flesh? But no, she's remembers back in in the cannibal days. But on Mewu, they weren't cannibals. There's so much food on that island, literally just lying around in fruits and vegetables that you've never seen before. There's like on that island, I had a thing. It was like a combination between a lemon and a lime, but had the sugar content of an orange. One of the most amazing things that I've ever eaten. And then Nixon and I were sitting like out in the freaking jungle. And he's like, "Oh yeah, you hungry?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, a little bit." And he just goes in the ground and he pulls up this nut, like the size of like a racquetball, and kind of brushes the dirt off and chops it in half and goes, "Here you go." And it was like this combination between like a macadamia nut and something else. I couldn't really but there was ridiculous amounts of foods. Will, I could knock you out cold and put you on that island and you would wake up and you would not starve. There's so much fish around that island that I actually hit a fish with the outboard on the tender one night, and we hauled the thing up and there was a fish stuck on the outboard blade. I mean, it was just insane. That's another great picture in Nixon. And the waterfalls there are just something literally like out of a movie. You pull into that anchorage and like the natives come out and paddle out. Now, after Hurricane Pam, the yacht club was destroyed. So we started the GoFundMe campaign to rebuild that. And we took this plaque when I was there on latitude to Ansanvari Village. And those are all the names of the people that donated. And that plaque was made by Philip Sharp, who got to go with me. I met him in New Zealand. He was the original designer. He was the designer of the Batmobile for the Tim Burton Batmobile. And he did that plaque from a Kiwi. These guys this is also on Maywu. There's a thing called custom dances, and they vary from island to island, and they put on a custom dance for us. In the opening video, you saw the people that were walking around there. Now, music wasn't introduced to Vanuatu until World War II, and this was taught by the U.S. kind of soldiers and people in the U.S. Navy, and they introduced rudimentary instruments to the Vanuatu, to the Nivan people. You'll see that single string bass. It's a big box, a 4-string guitar, and essentially a drum. And that is that's a traditional Vanuatu string band. Now, Will, do you have any questions on anything so far?
Well, I mean, I got a couple. I'm still trying to figure out where we are exactly and how we fly to in the logistics and where most of the major ports that boats would be basing themselves out of for something like this.
Well, the next major port is here in Espiritu Santo. Espiritu Santo was a major base during World War II. They had a large airfield there. What delayed the invasion of Guadalcanal was actually what happened to this ship right here. This is the President Coolidge. It was a converted cruise ship and was filled with troops and supplies on its way from San Francisco to Vanuatu. Now, what was interesting about this particular ship, it was so fast that it was thought that it didn't need a naval escort, actually, because it could outrun most of the Navy ships at the time. So they were pulling into Espiritu Santo, and the captain, by the way, he was an excellent captain. He was really a reason of why most of the people survived what happened next. So he constantly drilled abandoned ship drills on here. The whole way over. So they're pulling into Espiritu Santo.
More than a drill shot.
Well, that was that wasn't the drill. That was the real thing. So what happened was that the harbor was actually mined. They didn't tell the captain. They got a radio report that there was a Japanese sub behind them. So the captain went into the harbor full steam ahead to try to get in past these subnets that were there. Well, anyway, he drove right into a minefield, not knowing. 2 mines went off. One in the major one, which killed the ship, was right in the engine room. There was a gentleman that was instantly killed when that happened, and another one that went off, I believe, in the bow. So when that happened, he actually took the ship and ran it aground. The the ship, I think it was like they had like, it was like 3 hours, but they managed to get everybody off the boat with the exception of one guy who was actually trying to rescue someone. He fell down the stack. They couldn't get him out, and they got most of the guys off the boat. And then the boat actually slid off that bank with the stern resting in 200 feet of water. The bow is in 64 feet of water. Now it's probably one of the coolest dives I've ever done. When you kind of go down, you get there's like a line of like where you can't really see, the water's not that clear, but you get below that line, and then it looks like the Titanic is like literally on its side. And wow. I spent a week diving that, even doing night dives on board there. But we went in all down through the engine room. There's in the main ballroom, there's a statue called the Lady, which you can go and you can kiss the lady, which I've done. In the main hull, there's all tanks and Jeeps and all sorts of stuff. And again, I was really fortunate to do this back in 2008. I went back in 2016, and a lot of the parts of the ship have been closed off because it's really starting to degrade rapidly. But one of the just an amazing dive and on Espiritu Santo. Espiritu Santo, there's also a little island which is just south of there, which a French guy took a Balinese village, 200-year-old Balinese village, took it apart, rebuilt it on an island in Vanuatu, and that's a resort that you can go to. It's really cool if you want to stay there. Now, we talked about wrecks earlier on. This wreck is a picture that I took in Palakula Bay, which is just north. If you look at, like, Santu looks like kind of Wisconsin's. But anyway, this is the bay right here called Palakula Bay, just ringed with these wrecks that are in there in various states of decay and repair. And there's a couple of good dives up there. It's like,
that's what I'm going back to, Sean. It's like, how's the charting? And the depth seems fairly precarious.
Yeah. You got to get in the tender. You got to scout it out. Even after you drop the anchor, oftentimes I'll hop in the water and we'll get a visual, because sometimes we'll miss a reef or we'll miss a rock. Good news is a lot of the anchorages are super clear. You can kind of see everything, but it's the charts are best guesses in a lot of parts. And Vanuatu is littered with a lot of wrecks. The kind of, unfortunately, the Blue Gold during Hurricane Pam, which was, again, one of my all-time favorite yachts, is still on the beach in Havana Bay. And this is a picture that I took back in January of 2017. The boat behind it was a salvage crew that was trying to pull it off the reef that did not succeed. And today the boat was donated to the Vanuatu government, where unfortunately they've stripped it and gotten all the materials that they cut off there, and eventually they'll probably just tow that out and turn that into a reef, which is a shame, because that was again one of my all-time favorite boats.
But you didn't drive it up on the rocks, did you?
I did not drive it up on the rocks. I'll tell you who was on board that night was Nixon. He was there watching that boat with 4 other people, and he said, he stayed with that boat right to the bitter end till they drove it right to the beach. That was quite the feat. But wow. I mean, well over 100-mile-an-hour winds. Now, the last island, again, we have, like, there's even, like, on Santu, there's an area called the Blue Hole. There's plains. Up north, there's a spot called Champagne Beach. All of these just wonderful, wonderful spots to visit and to go to. And then you'll find, like, again, like some cool village, or all of a sudden you'll come up and find like a villa just built into the side of stuff. It really is exploring at its best. Now, this last island is just slightly north of the main chain in Vanuatu. This is in the Banks Island, and it's an island called Uraparapara. And this island is a massive extinct volcano. It kind of looks like Pac-Man. So if you look inside, like from the air, from the top of the mouth into the inset right there, that's 2.5 miles. And at the end of that, at the end of that, let me pull this video up. The is like a village. This is some drone footage of latitude that we took while we were up there, and you can see there's some fires out in the woods and some rudimentary structures. And these people, pretty primitive. They don't get a lot of visitors, or a lot of cruisers don't come up here. And we look like a spaceship when we landed. And one of the coolest things that I ever got was, like, this guy kind of rode up to the boat, and generally the natives will come up and we had great water making capabilities. So they'd come up with jugs and we'd fill up all their water, give them food or whatever. Well, anyway, you can see the paddle that he has in there, and that's a dual bladed paddle with a carbon fiber shaft. And behind me right here, you can see I got it decorated for Christmas. You can see that paddle I have there. That's the paddle that he had. And it was cool because it had like this shark drawn on one side, then another shark drawn on the other, and it was hand carved. And I said to the guy, I go, that's a cool paddle. Do you want to trade something for it? And he's like, well, no, it's not my paddle. It's my friend's paddle. And I said, hold on a second. And I handed him that paddle, which was feather light. And he got in the boat and he goes, and he looks over his shoulder to me and he goes, keep it. And just got out of there as fast as he could. And it was like handed him a Ferrari engine for his dugout canoe. Again, this is just a small sampling of Vanuatu. A lot of great stories, a lot of great memories from that area. I got to really sail with some fantastic people there. The Nixon, again, I still keep in touch with him. He's on the island. The island is constantly getting whacked by hurricanes. If anybody wants to donate any money to the cause in Vanuatu, email me. That's Sean at worthavenueyachts.com. And I'd be happy to pass on something to Nixon. Nixon's also on Facebook as well too.
Hey, Sean, on a sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
More practical note, what about provisioning and kind of ports based at? I mean, going back to where someone would base themselves to leave to go to this area.
So you're going to provision Port Vila is your main port. They've got supermarkets there. We can fly supplies in. It's you really got to plan. You really got to plan ahead of time. But there's great local provisioning. Like I said, some of the best beef I've ever eaten. And as far as fruits and vegetables goes, and flowers and all that, we would rock up to one of these islands or one of these villages, and I'd talk to the chief and I'd go, what do you have for fresh vegetables or fresh fruit? And they would come back with baskets of stuff we've never seen, or like the chef has never even seen. And that was that's the kind of the magical part about I love about these off the beaten track places, is that you'll get to eat things and experience stuff that you never normally would. And it's also the key about having a good chef on board as well, that can kind of make interesting stuff out of all the interesting stuff that he'll find. And as far as fish goes, and we would just go between the islands, throw a line out and bang, and just nail a tuna. And that was, I mean, it was like some of the most amazing fishing that we've ever had. So, anyway, I just like to, so that's it. Anybody have any questions out there about Vanuatu? I saw,
I didn't see
Gina, I saw your comment earlier out there. Thank you. Good to see you too. Where's Gina's? There she is. There's Gina. And then Maria, always thank you, Maria, for tuning in. Chloe from our office in Monaco.
Where are we going to next, Sean?
Oh, and Patrick, all the way from Ireland. Where are we going next? We're going to be going to the Solomon Islands. And then back of the Solomon is cool. We had Billow on for Thailand. Billow was actually on board for the Solomon Islands, so he will be back as well. So we that'll be pretty good. Solomons are interesting. Hopefully maybe we'll get David Kennedy on. He runs a dive operation out of Gozo, an amazing diver, really a great source of information. We'll talk a little bit about the Kennedys. It's interesting because I've actually been to the island where JFK after PT 109, that incident. I found it interesting that there's an actual bar on that island, which, really maybe wasn't surprising, given, it's a Kennedy island, but anyway, also want to say thank you to my friends at the Yacht Club de Monaco, the New York Explorers Club, everybody at Worth Avenue. Thank you for everybody else that tuned in for these Diving with Captain Sean's. Solomon Islands coming up next. Also on the next Luxury Spotlight with Diving and Captain Sean, the history of sunglasses with a very special guest. She has a unique business where she's for the past 30 years, has provided all the sunglasses for most of the films and movies that you've seen today. If you're into sunglasses, I'm a sunglass whore. You don't want to miss that. Will, you get anything to add?
No. I think leaving you as a sunglass whore is the way to go.
All right. We'll see you next time on Diving to Captain Shore. More for the South Pacific coming up. Have a great morning.
See you, Sean.
Well done! Wilson! 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 Wilson!